Hey guys, all right, this part of the cell unit is going to discuss cell transport. When I'm talking about cell transport, I'm not talking about how the cell moves from one place to another. Instead, I'm talking about how materials like oxygen and really important things need to go into and out of the cell. Okay, so the thing that protects the cell is the cell membrane. And you guys remember, let me show you this picture here. Hopefully you guys can see it. On the inside of the cell is water, and on the outside of the cell is water. Okay, so this is your cell membrane. And what does it have to be made up of if water is on the inside and water is on the outside? Well, it has to be made up of a lipid layer. And you guys recall from the last unit that this layer that makes up the membrane is called a phospholipid bilayer. Okay, phospholipid bilayer. And these are the ones that kind of look like jellyfish. Okay, so if I were to expand this area, it would look like this all the way around. Okay, so remember that over here, the phosphate heads are hydrophilic, so they're attracted to water, and then the tails are hydrophobic, so they repel water. And the heads are always oriented either inside towards the water or outside towards the water. And the tails are always hidden inside the membrane. Okay, so it's an important structure so that the water can be brought in towards the membrane, but the lipid tails push it away. So that helps maintain this barrier all around the cell membrane. Now, the cell membrane's job is to control what goes in and out of the cell. Okay, so if it's something bad, it might try to go in, but the membrane's going to block it from coming in, so it's going to make it go back out. Kind of like, this is a silly example, but a bouncer at a club, right? They control who goes in and out. If you're not 21 years old, you get kicked out. Okay, so the membrane is very selective on what can go in and what can go out, and so it's referred to as a selectively permeable membrane. Permeable, if you break it down, like if you think of permit, does it permit things to go into the cell? Well, yes, some things, but not all things, and so that's why we say it is selectively permeable. Now, there are some things that need to go in, but the membrane will not allow it. So what's embedded throughout the membrane are these little protein channels or protein carriers. Okay, so sometimes there's something that needs to go in where the membrane is going to reject it, so it needs a helper protein to allow it to go in. Okay, so we'll talk about these kind of things in just a minute. Because the membrane is so important on controlling what goes into the cell and out of the cell, it is what is most important in helping the cell maintain stable conditions. And that word for stable conditions is homeostasis. Okay, so the membrane is one of the most important structures of the cell in helping it maintain homeostasis. Okay, so let's look at some pictures. So again, this is showing that there is water on the inside and water on the outside. These heads are your phosphate heads, as you can see here, which are hydrophilic, and then the tails are hydrophobic. Okay, so the water is going to be attracted to the heads on the inside and on the outside, but the lipid tails are going to push it away. It's going to reject the water. Okay, so it helps keep this membrane, helps it keep the barrier so that we can keep water on the inside and we can keep water on the outside. Remember, if this membrane was made up of polar things, it would just dissolve and we wouldn't have cells, we wouldn't have membranes, we'd just be kind of a big glob of gunk, I guess. Okay, here's another picture, more of a 3D type image. Remember, cells are not just a flat structure, they have dimensions. So this picture kind of shows that. All these purple circular structures are the phosphate heads, and all these squiggly things are the lipid tails. Again, hydrophilic on the top and the bottom because they're water loving, they're attracted to the water, but then the lipid tails are hydrophobic. All right, here's another picture. This is more symbolic of what it looks like. So all the yellow that you see are the phosphate heads, and then looking at a cross section, you can see the tails. But remember, I told you sometimes things need to go into the cell, but the membrane will not allow it. So things are trying to go in from the outside to the inside or from the inside to the outside. But sometimes it's not allowed. So you have these special proteins embedded all throughout. You can see them down in this picture as well. These proteins will allow certain things to go through. Okay, so these are very important. Sometimes they're protein channels that just kind of open up, creating a channel for things to pass through. And sometimes they act like carriers, so they'll kind of open up like this, surround the material, and then open it to the other side to let it out. So we'll pretend this marker is like that. So it opened up to allow it in, surrounds it, and then lets it go through to the other side. So those are protein carriers, protein channels, things like that. Okay, so again, the membrane is selectively permeable. It will let some things go through, but not all things. So some things that need to go through might have to go through a protein channel or carrier in order to get to the other side. Do that in class. Okay, so when we're talking about cell transport, the only time things need to transfer from one side to the other is if there is something called a concentration gradient. A concentration gradient. So when you think of the word concentration, you should think of amount, not necessarily how hard you're thinking, but the amount. Well, I guess that's related to the amount you concentrate, the amount you think, kind of the same. Okay, so let's say we have a cell. I'm going to draw 3 cells. Okay, so here are my cells. Oops, hopefully you see them. All right, and then I'm going to show you that there are materials on either side of the membrane. And I want you to tell me whether or not there is a concentration gradient visible. Okay. Okay, we'll try this again. Okay, so here are your 3 cells. You can see with this top one, there are a lot of particles out here and only a few inside. In this second one, there are a whole bunch inside, but only a few outside. On this one, you can see there's about the same on the inside and on the outside. So which of these have a concentration gradient? Okay, the first one and the second one do. They have a concentration gradient, which means there is a difference in the concentration from one side to the other. Okay, so you can see there's a lot out here, a little bit in here, a lot in here, a little bit out here, and then here it's pretty equal all throughout. So when you have a concentration gradient, the particles want to move. They want to go from where there's a high amount to where there's a low amount. So it's all spread out. They want it to be even. So would it be even if these molecules went out or if these molecules went in? Well, it's going to even out if some of them go in. Now, will all of them go in? No, because if that happens, then we'll have another concentration gradient. Okay, so they will go in until it's equal on the inside and on the outside. Okay, for this second one, do you think these will go in or these will come out? Okay, again, they move from where there's a lot to where there's a little, so the molecules will move out. And again, they don't all move out, just enough so that they reach equilibrium. Okay, and then this last one, remember that it's equal all throughout. Does that mean the molecules just stay still? Well, you know molecules constantly are moving, okay, but they're not going to move in a mass direction here. If one molecule moves in, another will move out in order to maintain that stability, equilibrium. Okay, so we're going to have several videos on the different types of transport, but there are 3 major types of cell transport, and you can see that listed here. There is passive transport, and passive transport does not require energy. That's why it's called passive. So molecules just move nice and easy from a high concentration to a low. Okay, so it's moving from high to low. Then you have active transport. Well, active means that it requires energy. Active transport requires energy, so it's going the opposite direction. It's moving against the concentration gradient. And then the last one is bulk transport. Well, bulk should remind you of something that's kind of big and heavy. Okay, so what happens here is that instead of the molecules just transferring straight across the membrane actually surrounds material and brings it into the cell. Okay, so big things come in like that or exit like that as well. Okay, and here's just a really simple diagram to show you the difference between passive and active. Okay, so let's say we have this ramp. Okay, this is a ramp. If you have stuff up here and it's going downhill, that does not require energy, so it would be passive transport. Okay, and remember this is high and this is low. Okay, so if material is going from high to low, that would be passive transport, so no energy is involved. Okay, but what if we need to take stuff up that hill? Okay, well, it's not as easy as just pushing it down. You're going to have to really work to get it up that ramp. So what's required to get it up the ramp? Energy. Okay, and if you use energy, that means it is active transport. And hopefully you remember the energy molecule. The energy molecule is ATP. Okay, so that's just a simple diagram to show the difference between passive and active. Hopefully it will help. So passive transport requires no energy. So it's very simple. It's like riding your bike down a hill. Whereas active transport requires energy. It's pushing everything against the gradient. And so that requires energy. Okay, so we are going to have separate videos that demonstrate each of the types of transport. And again, we're talking about transport across the membrane. And remember, membranes are made up of phospholipids, but they have proteins scattered throughout to help with that process. Okay, one more thing about the membrane is that the size of the molecule can be part of what determines if it can transfer across. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are pretty small, so they can transfer pretty easily across the membrane. Remember, amino acids are the building blocks for proteins, so they're really small too and can pass right through. But when they become larger, like these polymers, proteins and carbohydrates, the membrane rejects them. They're too big, they cannot go through. Ions are another thing. Ions are charged molecules, so sodium ions, the Na+, they cannot go straight through. Now sometimes we need it, so what will we use to get it to go across? That's right, proteins, protein carriers. They would be called ion channels in that case. Okay, so we're going to stop here and we will start talking about passive transport in another video.